listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm Brad Hafes, your host. Our purpose here on Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live a faith-filled, rich and full life in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. And we're so glad to have you here with us today. And I'd like to welcome a young man named Thomas to our studio. And Thomas, it's great to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Brad. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, and Thomas and I've never met. And so everything I find out in this podcast, I'm going to be learning brand new along with all of our listeners.
Yeah.
So, Thomas, tell me, you came to Fresh Hope, you said, about 1.5 years ago, huh?
Yep, that's correct. I had moved to Omaha from western Nebraska, and I'm staying with my parents. And my diagnosis was getting worse rather than better, and my therapist that I was seeing here recommended that I find a support group to go to. And I'm very religious, and my faith is very important to me, so that's one of the things that I was looking for when I was searching for a group. And when I found Fresh Hope, I was hoping that it was truly a faith-based program and not, just something that they write down to try to get people to come in.
Right. Or just the higher power, spiritual kind of,
Right.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much how I found out. And my dad goes with me every week. He's been a big supporter.
Oh, cool.
So the two of us have been going pretty much since October of last year.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a group that's facilitated by a couple of facilitators here in the metro area that I know well, and it's good to hear. One of the important things for me is sometimes people think, well, would it be the same in another group or another group? And I always say it's principles. It's recovery principles, those 6 principles. And when they're applied to somebody's life, it works. And that, as well as choosing hope through faith in Christ, that no matter what, things can work out for our good and do work out for our good because of Christ.
And that's what we found out through the tenets that we read every week, is that faith does play a big role in your recovery, and you don't necessarily need to go it alone. Christ is always with you, and he's on your side no matter what.
Yeah.
He's there holding your hand, getting you through it, even when you feel lonely and you think there's nobody else out there.
Right.
You've always got Christ on your side, and that's the one thing that's helped me.
Now, tell me, are you willing to share with me what your diagnosis is? What is it?
Oh, absolutely. I've got several. I've diagnosed schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, post-traumatic stress, and there was one other one that I don't remember, but my psychiatrist is kind of teetering on whether it's some anxiety disorder, but he doesn't think that fits. He thinks that it's more the
PTSD or something?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Sure. Well, that would make sense. Well, tell me about your experience. Tell me about your journey. What brought you back home, and how long has it been?
Well, my journey's kind of been my whole life. It started in my childhood. I was abused by my mother growing up, physically and mentally abused. And I kind of clammed up probably when I was 7 or so. I just quit making friends, just internalized everything. And finally, probably in 2010 or so, I was at work and ended up getting into an argument and just completely lost it. I had a complete breakdown or meltdown, if you would say. I blacked out, and I don't have much recollection of the incident.
Sure.
And so they ended up placing me in emergency protective custody and sent me to a mental health unit. And that was the first time I was ever diagnosed, or the first time that I'd ever seen a psychiatrist. It kind of opened my eyes, because what the psychiatrist was telling me was making sense. And then from there, my relationship, I was married to my wife for probably about 2 years, and my relationship started falling apart. There was a lot of infidelity on my part. Being home alone, I wasn't working, and being lonely, and listening to the enemy attacking you and trying to get you to believe that, if you reach out to other people, that you won't be alone necessarily. And so that ended up costing me my marriage, and I moved back here. It probably would have been about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, moved back in with my folks just to get me out of the situation. And that's when I found Fresh Hope. I was very hesitant because I'm one that I've learned to open up since I've been going to Fresh Hope, learning that telling your story isn't necessarily a bad thing. That I'm not alone, that I'm not the only person in the world that's dealing with these struggles and these issues.
Right. And many times in telling our story, it's really the Lord's way of redeeming the pain and the things that we have gone through, and because it helps other people.
Right. And I've forgiven my mother. I've come to forgive her for everything that was, that had happened. And we've got a very good relationship now. We get along great, and things are wonderful on that end. I just struggle with forgiving myself for, my previous relationships and, the things that I've done. And so that's kind of one of the struggles that I deal with. And I know that forgiving yourself is huge. It's a very important part of the healing process. And so that's kind of what I've been focusing on, is trying to get myself healed. And so that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. I just read a thing. I'll have to pass it on to you about a pastor who was writing about whether he could forgive himself or not, and his whole struggle with, knowing that he needed to forgive himself, and he just was, how can I forgive myself? And he boiled it down to the fact that what he could do was allow God to forgive him and allow himself to live in the forgiveness of God. And I thought it was really interesting. It was a different way of looking at it. And it made sense to me that many times we just don't want to let ourselves be forgiven. It isn't so much that we can't forgive ourselves, but we don't think we deserve it, so we don't allow God's forgiveness in.
And that's the big part of it is that looking back at the situation and realizing that I wasn't in my right mind necessarily because I wasn't on the medications and I wasn't doing the therapy and everything else, that it's not necessarily all my fault.
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm not at fault for it, but it's not, it's not like I did it intentionally, and it's not like I did it I premeditated it and went and said, this is what I'm going to do. No.
Well, I always talk about my own life that way. I always say, I'm not trying to excuse any of the bad behavior I had. There's no excuse. I'm responsible for it, but I'm telling you why. I'm telling you the reason for it. And it's not that I was choosing to sin. It's not that I was choosing to have bad behavior. These were not cognitive choices that I was making. It's a result of the condition. And some people that have never been there don't understand it, but I know what you're saying, because it wasn't as simple as, gosh, you just had a character flaw or sin issue in your life, and so you were going out and choosing to do these sorts of things. It wasn't that at all. And in fact, usually when people are on the medication and they're doing what's right, their true character comes forward. And many times they're not at all what they're like otherwise, without the medication and without treatment.
Right. And since I've been in treatment and have found medications at work, I'm completely a different person altogether. My folks have noticed that. The people at the Fresh Hope group that I go to have noticed a difference from when I first came to where I'm at now.
Good.
And I put a lot of it on the fact that I was worried about being judged. When I lived in western Nebraska, I lived in a very small town. It was like 600 people, and word spreads like wildfire out there of things happening. And with my meltdown, and it made the paper, and I became the town monster, basically is what it was.
Sure.
So I had a hard time going to the store or going to the post office just because people were looking at me, and I just automatically assumed that they were talking about me or they were laughing at me or
Sure.
things like that.
That just reinforces everything negative you're thinking about yourself at that point anyway.
Right. And my psychiatrist that I'm working with had told me that what other people think of you is none of your business. Was a saying that she gave me, and it kind of clicked because I can't control what other people think of me, just like I can't control what other people do.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's to the point that if I walk by a group and they start laughing at me, I no longer worry that they're laughing at me or that they know what's going on. It's more just maybe they just got done telling a joke or something.
Right.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
And
there's nothing worse than feeling like people are all staring at you and things like that. And this probably was not just for you. It wasn't paranoia. It was truly going on probably in a town of 600 people.
Yeah. And I mean, that was my biggest fear when my dad and I decided to try Fresh Hope. Went for the first time. I sat in the car and was almost in tears because I was afraid I was going to go in there and get judged.
Oh, yeah, sure.
That I would tell my story and people would just sit there and laugh or label me whatever they would label me. And when I walked in, it was amazing because it was like everybody was just the nicest people you could meet. And
many of them have stories like you do.
Exactly. And the biggest thing that helped me out was the fact that I learned right away that I'm not alone. For the longest time, I felt that I was the only one that had these disorders, that I'm the only one that felt this way. And going into group and finding out that there's 10 or 12 other people that have the same disorders or are going through the same situations, it helped me realize that, hey, you know what? I'm not crazy. I'm not an animal. I'm not a monster. I'm me, you know? And our group focuses big time on that you're not your disorder. I'm not bipolar. I'm not schizoaffective. Those are disorders that I have. I'm Tom. And I have these disorders,
And there's more to you than just those disorders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've just been so blessed to have a group of caring individuals that if I'm having a bad week and during check-in at group, if I'm kind of having a bad week, the facilitators, Nancy and Sterling, would come up and would be like, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? What, is there anything we can do for you? Is there anything you need? And I'd never had that before.
Yeah.
In a group type setting.
Cool.
And so that just helped me tremendously on my healing journey.
Sure. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way in your recovery?
Well, I've come to discover that in Christ's eyes, you're flawless. You're built perfectly in His eyes, and to me, that's all that matters. If somebody thinks I'm ugly or somebody thinks that I'm whatever, that's their opinion. That's a big thing that we deal with at our group is that, and then the tenants going through and realizing that that there is hope in a future beyond your diagnosis, and that your diagnosis isn't the end of the world, and that medications are important, but medications only do. I had a psychiatrist tell me that medications only do 50% of the work. You have to do the other 50%. And
you have to work with the medication.
Right.
There's your part.
There's not a pill out there that's going to mysteriously take away your diagnosis and make you better. You have to work at it.
And take care of any emotional issue you have on top of the disorders.
Right.
Because everybody's got emotional issues.
Right. And that's the other thing looking back from where I was at the beginning to where I'm at now, there's been a lot of change. I'm more able to reach out if somebody's new to the group and we're sharing, we're kind of seeing how everybody's week was going. And I noticed that somebody's having a similar situation to what I've been through. I'm able to go up and talk to them after a group and be like, hey, you know what, I've been through that similar situation. Here's some things that might help.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful.
And whereas before I never would have done that, I would have just kept it to myself and
Right.
been like, yeah, they'll get it figured out and go for
Yeah, that fear of rejection can keep us from doing a lot of that, can it?
it. Can. And that was the other thing that was very disabling for me was I was always, when it came to playing sports when I was growing up, I was always the last one picked. I was always made fun of just
Same
because,
here.
I was a bigger kid growing up, and so I was kind of clumsy, and I wasn't the most sure-footed, And so I'd get made fun of, and that would just compound what I had going on at home, So now it's like I was always afraid to reach out and do things. I was
Sure.
afraid to reach out to somebody and offer help because they would say no, or they would say, just leave me alone, I'll deal with it. Just like going to group and having facilitators that don't really care, that are just there to, do the hour or do the half hour or whatever, and then go home. No,
Right,
it's not
right.
like that.
Yeah.
So now it's like, what, if I'm talking to somebody and offering help or offering advice and they don't take it, now I don't see that so much as rejection as it is they're just not ready
There you go. Yeah.
ready to deal with it yet.
Yep.
And hopefully that thought will stick and resonate. And,
Absolutely.
in the Lord's time, when he's ready for it to sink in, it'll sink in and help out.
Now, you have a number of different diagnoses. If I remember right, schizoaffective disorder is one of them. And did you say bipolar, or you were just giving that as an example, maybe?
No, I've got schizoaffective disorder.
And borderline?
Borderline personality
Okay.
disorder. I've got bipolar, but I've also got schizophrenic.
Right, which is schizoaffective
Right.
disorder. Yeah. So it's that's kind of like having bipolar and the psychosis together.
Right.
Yeah.
I have voices and delusions. And
Do you hear many voices and delusions anymore?
Not
or
anymore. There for a while, it was all the time, and they're
medicine has kind of caused those to subside. And,
Yep, and doing my counseling and different things like that has helped out.
Question is how do you sort through which is the personality disorder, which is the schizoaffective disorder? How do you know when you have multiple diagnoses like this, which is what and what is which and what's what?
Well, that's a good question, and I love researching stuff, and I've researched because when I was first diagnosed, they just gave me a name of what it was and then sent me on my way with some med. And so I did some research on it, and all of these, the schizoaffective disorder, the bipolar, the borderline personality disorder, all have similar
They sure do,
traits.
don't they? Sometimes they do.
and it's very hard to tell the difference between one from the other. I've been able to differentiate, like if I'm meeting somebody new for the first time, my borderline personality disorder kicks in, and it's like if they don't accept what I'm saying, or if I get rejected, that affects my mood and will kick in, and then that'll cause my bipolar to start kicking in, and then once my bipolar gets going, I get the voices, and
Sure.
so it kind of snowballs from there.
So you've been able to sort that through. And that's been important to be able to sort through, I'm sure, huh?
It's been very important. It's helped my life seem more like a life instead of a video game almost.
Yeah.
For me,
that's a really powerful analogy, because sometimes I think part of what I think is the hardest thing to do when you have a diagnosis and when you've really been knocked down by the disorders and fallen victim to it unknowingly because you didn't even know you had it. What happens is it's really difficult to get up and live to choose to live, isn't it?
It is. And it's especially when you don't know a lot about your disorder. You don't know what'll help. You don't know what all the symptoms are. It's just a mess of how intertwined all these diagnoses are.
Mm-hmm. And I really hear you saying it's important to do some research on your own and not just expect the doctor to tell you everything that you need to know. In fact, sometimes doctors aren't very good about doing that, are they?
No, every psychiatrist I've ever seen and people that I've talked with have said that basically they get told, okay, yeah, you got bipolar and you've got generalized anxiety disorder. Here's some medications for you. I'll see you in 2 months.
Yeah.
And for me, that wasn't good enough. I needed to know what was causing it.
Well, and how important was it when you found those things out? How helpful was it to your recovery?
It was amazing how it helped my recovery. It helped me realize what I could do to help,
It actually empowered you to become your own advocate for getting better, right?
Right. And I never would have in my life tried to figure out what my triggers were. I never knew what triggers were before until I started researching it.
Sure.
And then once I started doing that, I realized, okay, well, if I avoid these situations or if I avoid these triggers, as they're called, I don't have the episodes. So it's kind of like, okay, well, if we can do some slight changes in our day-to-day activities, it makes tremendous impact on your day-to-day living.
Yeah. Now, how well do you believe you were living prior to Fresh Hope on a scale of 1 to 10? How well?
Oh, I was probably a 4, maybe 3.5. Not very good.
What do you feel like on most days as far as living well? What do you...
You mean before Fresh Hope?
No, now after Fresh Hope, yeah.
I'm probably at a 9. It's...
Wonderful.
I wake up and know that, that life's worth living. I have my moments and I have my times where my depression sets in and I'll be depressed and not want to get out of bed. And then there's other times where my manic side kicks in and it's like, I've got so much energy, I don't know what to do.
Right.
But
for the most part, it sounds like you're pretty even or within ranges that don't debilitate you, at least.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you'd like to say? We've got probably about 7,000 listeners from across the United States, Canada, and actually around the world in all various countries. Is there anything that you would like to encourage people that are listening? Maybe it's somebody that's, really not doing well or wishing that they could get better. Anything you'd like to say to them?
Well, the first thing is not to give up. You're here for a reason. God put you on this earth for a purpose. It might seem dark and gloomy now where you're at, but, just going to God's Word and reading the Bible and studying your diagnoses, trying to figure out what can help you out, just being your own advocate. If you have questions for your psychiatrist, don't be afraid to ask them. If you find a therapist and all of a sudden you guys hit a roadblock to where you're not making progress anymore, there's absolutely nothing wrong with finding a different therapist because we all grow in different ways.
Absolutely.
And there can be a point in time where you've outgrown your therapist. It's not that the therapist is bad. It's just that you're at a point in your life where, you need somebody that offers different
tools or skills.
Right.
Sure.
And research books. The one book that I found that helped me the most by Eckhart Tolle, it's called The Power of Now. And that basically goes through staying focused on today and what's going on today and not worrying about tomorrow, what you got going on or what's going to happen tomorrow, or worry about fixing the past because you can't. And that just makes your rut that much bigger.
Yeah.
And staying focused on today, what you have going on today, makes a tremendous difference on how you look at things and how it affects your life.
Absolutely.
Because you don't have the anxiety of worrying about tomorrow, or you don't have the disappointment of worrying about something that you didn't succeed at in the past.
Right. And you're able to be in the present moment.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Thomas, I really want to thank you for coming in today and sharing your story with us. There's no doubt in my mind that it's going to be helpful to many people.
Well, I hope so. That's what I hope.
Yeah, well, thank you. It sounds like you've got a remarkable journey going, and please be encouraged.
I am. Thank you.
And for those of you who are listening today, we want to encourage you to know that there is a plan, there's a future, and God is good, and He's able to take our brokenness and turn it around. So we want to thank you for listening to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health, and we hope it's been helpful to you. We'd love to hear from you. Please email us with questions or comments or insights. And if you want, you can leave a voicemail on our podcast website at www.freshhopeformentalhealth.com. We'd love to connect with you on Facebook or Twitter. And of course, we have a YouTube channel. If you wouldn't mind doing a favor for me, if you're listening to this podcast and you're listening to it on iTunes, would you please write an honest and open, transparent comment on it? That would be really helpful. We want you to tell your friends about the program and encourage them and pass this along to them. Between now and the next time you hear the podcast, may you be filled with the Lord's hope, fresh and new daily. Once again, I'm Brad Hafes. This has been another edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. You've been listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. For more information, go to www.freshhope.us.